finally. I am one of your hosts, Tim, and joining me tonight, as usual, is Lachlan.
Howdy.
And Ruben.
Hello, all.
So strangely, got my son a Mac Air, and it caused some sort of IP address conflict, which took me about an hour tonight to figure out so we can make this thing work. So thanks for your patience, boys, but we're finally able to kick this thing off. So
Very good, buddy.
happy days. So I need a drink after that. So once again, I'm going for the Kraken because I'm loving it. I noticed today too at BWS they had the 1 litre bottle marked down from 87 to 71.
Yeah, okay.
Oh, okay.
So I was like, yoink. So I've got a whole 1 litre bottle waiting for when this one finishes.
Have you got the 1 litre bottle there? Does it look different from the regular bottle?
It's just larger. It's exactly the same shape, but just larger.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Nice.
So it's good. And what are you drinking there, Lachlan?
Kraken.
Oh, yeah. Come on, Ruben. What are you drinking?
Kraken.
Oh, yeah.
That's it. Hey, cubed.
Triple Krakens.
More crack than a plumber's convention.
That's it.
Hey.
I think I might have to look that 1 litre one up, Tim, because that was the last drop of my Kraken. So.
Oh, same with me. I just finished the bottle.
BWS, boys.
Synchronized Krakens.
Right now.
That's it. Nice.
Mad. All right. Well, tonight we get to have a play in the Cave. It's one of those things that when you search it, you realise. I mean, we've taken longer than we thought we would to get through this book. I think this idea, this concept of the cave, takes people longer than our entire show has so far to get through.
Apparently so.
So, obviously, our commitment tonight is to keep it to one show for this part, and sort of start dabbling into what comes after that as well until we hit the halfway point. So, before we do that, Ruben, I believe you're volunteered to do the recap for last week. Do you want to go through what happened last week, please?
Oh, yeah, sure. So speaking of the cave, last week was a little bit odd when they started talking about different levels of knowledge. First they started off with this stuff about the sun, the simile of the sun, which was essentially saying that apart from all these virtues we've been talking about, there's something higher than that. And that's when came the simile of the sun. Essentially, Socrates' view is that there is something more real and above all of these virtues and all of these realities, and he calls it the good. He's not really clear what the good is, but essentially what he's saying is that it is by the light of the good that we can comprehend all these other things. And from then, he sort of works off into talking about different levels of understanding. Without going into too much detail, I feel like having read the next section about the cave, it makes that whole other section a lot clearer. Well, I felt like it did anyway. But I guess the major points to remember is that Socrates is of a mind that the highest level of reality are these forms, and that's the only thing that really constitutes knowledge. And then below that, you've got reasoning and mathematical reasoning and things of that nature. And then underneath that, you've just got what he calls sort of mere beliefs, which is just when you see a thing itself, like a physical object. And then below that, at the very lowest level of knowledge, is illusions. So pictures or statues of something else. And one more little thing to point out, basically what he's saying is all those physical objects and the particulars he would consider only opinion. And to get to the level of knowledge, you need to be using what is akin to mathematical reason or logic. And that's kind of where we ended it. That was all right. I didn't write that down or anything. I would totally wing that.
You did good, buddy. You did good.
Yeah, I was pretty happy with that.
I'll do it on the night.
I'll do it on the night.
Well summarised. So the Cave of Socrates. It's a dark place, and it was pretty cool. So, Lachlan, do you want to introduce the concept of the cave?
Yeah, sure, buddy. I mean, it's pretty funny just how he introduces this. Like, it's like literally one sentence, and then like dives into this thing, which is pretty funny. I just read you that one sentence because it's just funny.
Yeah.
And now I said, let me show in a figure how far our nature is enlightened or unenlightened. Behold. Okay.
It's like a
That's
cheap
crack up at it.
magician.
Absolutely. Yeah, so he's got this allegory that he's come up with. Obviously not the kind of thing that comes up on the fly. But so he's got this story. So I'll set it out. So the setting of the cave. So the idea is that there are 3 prisoners who are bound and cannot move inside the cave. They've been there since birth, and all they can do is stare forward at a blank cave wall. So they can't turn their head sideways. All they can do is look at this wall. Behind them, at a bit of a distance, is a fire, obviously providing some light from behind them. And between the fire and the prisoners is a walkway with a high wall. And now people walk along behind this walkway with items on their heads. And as they do so, the light of the fire will project a shadow on the cave wall in front of the prisoners, so that they can observe, well, these shadows on the wall. And that's what they see. So now, like the prisoners themselves, all they can do is see the shadows. They've got no knowledge of the outside world or anything like that because they've been born in this cave and they've lived there all their life. And so they name and discuss the shadows. And the shadows are basically their perception of reality, and it's all that they know. So, like, they don't know what the shadows are of, obviously. All they know are the shadows themselves because that's all they can see. And so they would play games and, discuss, what shadow they thought was going to come next, and they'd name them and all this sort of thing. And then would perhaps, praise each other over, who would guess what shadow was going to come along next or that sort of thing. And so, like, that's what their concept of knowledge would be, was this sort of game around the shadows. You're with me still, or shall I...
No, I think that's a good time to pause though. So
Yeah.
that makes a lot of sense. Strangely enough, there's 3 of us. I feel like we should turn off our lights and be like, shadow.
Yeah. You can you do some shadow puppets or something on the wall or something. Do a little bunny. Or...
Yeah, that reminded me of Robin Hood Men in Tights with the shadows that they did in that. That was pretty funny.
It's been a long time.
It has been. So look, okay, so I think it's a really good example as far as it's easy to comprehend once you've taken your time to read it once or twice. I think the first time I read it, I kind of didn't quite get the physicality of how the shadows were thrown and from where. I think at first I kind of imagined a puppet show with the light in front, not from behind them. So yeah, which I'll discuss later. I think it's slightly flawed, that example, but yeah, it's fine.
just for the point of a story, it's all good.
Yeah. So essentially what he's saying is all they can see that moves is shadows. And they can hear things, but the source of the shadow they've never seen, they can't see, they're unable to see, therefore it's not there.
And then they associate the sounds with the shadows, and basically, because that's all they can see, they assume that the shadows are all there is, and those sounds are associated with those shadows. So,
Yep. They got no idea people are carrying objects or
behind
like
them.
That.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so let's move on to stage 2 of the description.
Escape.
Yeah, that's from freaking Finding Nemo.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the prisoners escapes, and in doing so, he finds his way out of the cave and into the light, and is shocked by what he finds and can't believe it's real. The light is stinging his eyes, and he's straining to be able to sort of see, because he's had all his life in the darkness, and the light actually hurts him. And while he's becoming accustomed to it, and he's starting to be able to sort of look around and see, he's realizing that his view of the world and what they thought reality was wrong. And he, I guess, is starting this sort of seeking of enlightenment, we'll call it, and the true nature of what reality is. Socrates sort of talks about the fact that he could observe the sun and understand that it's the true sun and the provider of seasons and all this sort of thing. And that anyway, after having this sort of enlightenment, he's going to go back into the cave and see his cave buddies and try and tell them what he's seen.
I want to talk, before we talk about the return of the philosopher instead of Jedi. I want to think about that for a minute. So, I do like how when he's first removed, the example is he's just blinded by the light, and it's uncomfortable. And
well, are you talking about when he turns around and sees the people with the shapes, or when he actually leaves the cave?
Well, yeah, you're right. So there is a distinction there, isn't there? So he talks about
first he turns around and sees the people with the shapes, and the way that
reluctantly dragged up a steep and rugged ascent, and is held fast until he's forced in the presence of the sun himself. Is he not likely to be pained and irritated? When he approaches the light, his eyes will be dazzled, and he will not be able to see anything out of what are now called realities.
Oh, I misunderstood that. I sort of took that as a hypothetical, not that he was sort of dragged up there and sort of held into the ascent.
Oh, that happens later on.
Well, yeah, because that's directly after. Here we go. Oh, no, you're right, Ruben. So, yes, I skipped a piece. Okay, I'll read this part. And now look again and see what will naturally follow if the prisoners are released and disabused of their error. At first, when any of them is liberated and compelled suddenly to stand up and turn his neck around and walk and look towards the light, he will suffer sharp pains. The glare will distress him, and he will be unable to see the realities of which, in his former state, he had seen the shadows.
Yeah, you're quite right.
Yep, yeah, that's right. So basically, he turns around. Yeah, he turns around and he kind of sees that. He sees a couple of things. Like, if at first of all, that even the fire that's casting the shadows would hurt his eyes, and then he would sort of kind of start to realize that the shadows on the wall were kind of a bit of nonsense. My book actually uses the term nonsense. When do you think he would say? What do you think he would say if he was told that what he used to see was so much empty nonsense, and that he was now near a reality? So even at that point, what they're saying is he turns around and sees these other things, and he's like, even if that point, if you told him that that's still not the highest level of reality, he would probably think that that's ridiculous, because he's spent his whole life looking at shadows. He turns around and he sees what's causing the shadows. Surely he would think that's as far down as the rabbit hole goes, which is there when that bit you referred to, Tim, where he's forced. They say, and if he were forcibly dragged up the steep and rugged ascent into the sunlight, then he'd really be blinded.
Well, but before that, so I like how it says this part where it says that he will be unable to see the realities of which his former state had seen. So just by the very act of, he's never looked directly at light before, so now by looking directly at a light source, many of the shadows he would have been able to perceive, his eyes have adjusted, and he can't see those shadows anymore.
Yep.
Which I thought was interesting. But then it also says, the glare will distress him, he'll be unable to see the realities, which I just said. When he is approaching nearer to being and his eyes turn towards more real existence, he has a clearer vision. What will be his reply? and you may further imagine that his instructor is pointing to the objects as they pass and requiring him to name them. Will he not be perplexed? Will he not fancy that the shadows which he formerly saw are truer than the objects which are now shown to him? So I thought that was interesting. I thought of like the bird thing. Like, I'm bad at finger shadow puppets, obviously, but if like this shape of putting your thumbs together and making wings with your hands and flapping them, if you do that as a shadow onto a wall, if you have some skill, you could argue, oh, that looks like a flying animal. And so for that person to then look and no, in fact, it's some dude with his hands in front of the fire just doing this thing, that's going to be...
in fact less like a real bird than the shadow.
Yeah, but you would think, but that doesn't look anything like the shadow. It just looks like two pairs of hands.
You're saying you wouldn't be able to connect the two things as being related?
Yeah, I think so. Or
So
not that you couldn't, but it would be very difficult to, and
it'd be confusing. And
the ability to recognize that object and name it immediately would be more difficult, because if you've seen the shadow 100 times, as soon as it sees the outline of that shape, oh, that's flying animal. But when it sees hands together, what is that? And trying to link the two things together would be confusing.
And I think just the fact that you're realizing that your whole reality is a joke is just sort of sending the head spinning, that what's real, what isn't real now. I don't know. Who am I? Like, where am I? Like, you're going to question everything, because everything that you held to be true is now in doubt. And I think you just have that general state of confusion,
And to sort of jump forward a bit, just to make this little bit inside the cave make a little bit more sense. Later on, Socrates goes on to describe that as being the fire casting the shadows as being our physical sun. And so everything inside that cave there, my understanding, is essentially the physical world, which relates to what he calls, what we mentioned earlier, as the lowest forms of knowledge. So the things themselves and the illusion of those things. So that's kind of what he's talking about in the cave. So in the cave. So at this point, he's in his epistemology, or his level of knowledge, he's talking about the lowest, the two lowest rungs of knowledge. So, the thing themselves or the illusion of the thing. So the thing itself, or a statue, so to speak.
Yeah, okay, I follow. Yep.
No, that makes sense.
Yeah. I thought I'd bring that up now rather than waiting, because when I read through it, I didn't really understand it until I read what Socrates explains later, that what he's talking about there is the physical world, because he refers to the sun that casts the fire that casts the shadow as being the sun, as in the real physical sun.
Yeah, and that makes, I suppose, more relevance when he talks about actually getting above ground and seeing the actual sun.
The actual sun that's really blinding.
Not the thing that you thought was the sun.
But there's a bit of a cruelty to this example too, like the as I was saying before, the shadow scenario of that person could name the shadow quickly, but if they've never seen a pair of hands before, and you go, well, what is this? Well, they won't know the answer. That's what he's getting at there. So even though they can see the more real, they don't know what it is, and they can't name it because they only know the shadow of it. They don't know the real thing itself.
Yeah.
For sure.
So anyway, as Lachlan said, I think, or we were saying after that bit, then he gets dragged up out of the cave into the sunlight, the real world, what we would call the real world.
Yeah.
And I think where that fits into his levels of knowledge is, I think the idea there is, or the actual truth, the actual reality of light and all of these things exists there. It's more real. So I guess if we're talking about the bird, in Socrates' mind, you can't have true knowledge of a bird until you're out in the world, like outside, out of the cave, because then you can see what an actual bird looks like, the actual form of a bird looks like. And then you go in, and when you go back inside the cave, where you see the physical bird, or the hands in our scenario, that is actually a lower level of existence than the actual bird outside outside of the cave. I think that's where it's on a first read through. It's a little bit confusing because we're thinking, oh, the cave is part of material reality. Outside the cave must be part of the material reality. How do you make it all match up? But I think you need to think of it in terms of Socrates' levels of knowledge. Outside the cave is actually the forms, which Socrates would call the highest level of reality.
Yep.
Yeah.
So it's a bit weird because it's kind of like if you're going to say it in really dumb terms, it'd be like everything inside the cave is physical reality, things that actually exist. Everything outside of the cave is just the ideas and the things that don't actually exist. But I think that's because these days in our society, those ideas have been inverted. So we think very materialistically. We think something doesn't actually exist unless you can describe it in terms of its physical or chemical makeup. That's kind of what we would consider the highest form of knowledge, where it's a total inversion for Socrates.
Yeah, I mean, well, I guess this is the pathway to goodness, which he can't yet sort of really define yet. So I mean, and I think that's sort of selling the point of what he's saying. Like, this is something that's so high that you've got to strive towards. That
Yeah.
it's not something that can just be like read of or looked at to understand. It's something that you've got to come to a higher reasoning to find, I guess.
Yeah, and I think it made sense of his simile of the sun from the previous chapter, because he was kind of trying to describe. He's like, oh, there's the sun, and it's by the light of the sun that you can see things as they actually are.
Yeah.
So now he's saying outside the cave where the sun is, that's where you really see what things actually are. So I guess in this analogy, the sun outside the cave would be goodness in its purest form.
Yeah. And it's shining or shedding the light there so that you can see
the actual form of the things, which are the physical things which are back in the cave. Yeah.
But it blinds too. So I like how it says, if he is compelled to look straight at the light, will he not have a pain in his eyes which will make him turn away to take an objects of vision which he can see? Oh, sorry, that's earlier. Here we go. And suppose once more that he is reluctantly dragged up a steep and rugged ascent and held fast until he is forced into the presence of the sun himself. Is he not likely to be pained and irritated? When he approaches the light, his eyes will be dazzled, and he will not be able to see anything at all of what are now called realities. So the presence of the actual full sun, not just the fire and a little bit of light, but the full sun, actually blinds him to his previous knowledge and previous reality. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, is the idea there that if he goes back down into the cave, the shadows sort of become meaningless to him? Is that...
Or that he can't even perceive them?
I think it's just that it's like rocking his world so much that that whole concept is just sort of blown away for the moment.
Yeah, why would you really give a crap about what's going on back in the cave anymore?
Well, and that sort of comes up a little bit later on as well, when they... I don't want to get too much.
They talk about who should be leader.
Yeah.
you with your foreshadowing.
Well, and me tying it into freaking Tolkien, it's the same problem again that the hobbits have when they return back to the Shire every time, is that they've been changed through what they've learnt. And it's a similar idea, I think, that once you sort of escape from that and grow and have this new revelation, that going back you're not the same, and you can't perceive where you were the same way.
Well, it was kind of like the losing their innocence, you know what I mean, and understanding of the real world for themselves as well, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a good example, because they come back to the Shire and all of their fellow hobbits that they used to be like are basically under the thumb of these tyrants. But because they've seen the higher reality of what's going on outside the Shire, they've gone, well, these guys don't actually have any power over you. You know what I mean? Because they see those higher values of knowledge and freedom and justice and whatever, so they're able to rally everyone together and fight back.
Yeah, exactly. But it's also why I don't particularly like Bilbo as a character, because he was changed, goes back, and sort of just doesn't do anything for 50 or 60 years until he's really, really old, and then he finally decides, oh, it's time to go on another adventure. And
yeah,
and it's right at the start of Lord of the Rings. But yeah, it's interesting. Anyway, let's not talk too much Tolkien. All right, so yeah, so let's move along. So I think we've covered that adequately to explain what's
talk
going
about
on
returning to the prisoners.
Yeah, that's right. Where's that bit?
Well, before we do, let's just say that he gets acquired. So the example moves on, because at the moment he's uncomfortable with looking at the sun, and there's a sense of loss that now no longer can perceive the realities and all that sort of stuff that he was seeing before. So I'll just keep reading this a little bit here. So he will require to grow accustomed to the sight of the upper world. And first he will see the shadows best, next the reflections of men and other objects in the water, and then the objects themselves. Then he will gaze upon the light of the moon and the stars and the spangled heaven, and he will see the sky and the stars by night better than the sun, or the light of the sun by day. Certainly. Last off, he will be able to see the sun, and not mere reflections of him in the water, but he will see him in his own proper place, and not in another, and he will contemplate him as he is.
Yes, I think it's just saying that it's not something you'll be able to take in all at once, right? It's understanding that level of light and goodness, or whatever it may well be, is something that's going to take you time, and the concepts are going to build with you until you can look at the sun, I guess. And
yeah, because he goes on to say later on he would come to the conclusion that it is the sun that produces the changing seasons and years and controls everything in the visible world, and is in a sense responsible for everything that he and his fellow prisoners used to see. So that again comes kind of back to the goodness. He's kind of like saying that the sun in that analogy is the ultimate good, or almost like God. Like that's the ultimate God. He's that sun is the highest thing that's sort of controlling everything else. But yeah, as you point out, it would take him a while to get there.
Yeah,
it takes time, and it's uncomfortable, but eventually accepts the truth, and starts not just accepting the truth, but pursuing the truth and trying to understand it more and more and more. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So
that's his way of just sort of saying like the pursuit of enlightenment, right? And so that's like the journey of the philosopher. Yeah.
Yeah. Basically, yeah. It's almost like the journey of enlightenment, I guess, is probably a good way to say it.
Yep. So then beyond that, which is interesting. So it moves on to, and when he remembered his old habitation and the wisdom of the den and his fellow prisoners, do you not suppose that he would felicitate himself on the change and pity them? Certainly he would. So it's interesting. So once they've actually settled down, and they've sort of started understanding and accepting this higher truth, then they reflect on, probably at some point they reflect on where they once were, and then they realize, oh, there's other people there still.
Well, and then not just that, he's saying like you would actually like celebrate that wisdom. That's what felicitate means. So it's actually sort of acknowledging that growth in yourself, I suppose, and just going, oh, how amazing that I now understand the reality, not what I thought was reality before.
That's right. And then he goes on to say, will our released prisoner hanker for after those prizes or envy this power or honor. So like he's talking about the games that they used to play where they would try to pick the shadows, see what's coming next, and match the sound to the shadows. He's like, he just wouldn't be interested in those things anymore.
Yeah, why would you bother?
Which is sort of kind of Socrates' whole thing about, I'm not really interested in money or riches or whatever. Just like those things are kind of empty to me. So I think he's trying to explain that, isn't he?
Yeah, and I think it's also like that whole pursuit of power thing, right? And this is how these guys would put a flex on, like, man, I always guess the right thing that's coming up, and wow, you're the best there is, and all that sort of thing. And
yeah,
and it's that whole thing about, I think they always painted that picture too, that like a true philosopher doesn't hanker after power, right? You're just looking for knowledge and wisdom. You don't care about power.
Yeah, well, that's why they quoted Homer saying, "Better to be the poor servant of a poor master."
Yep.
Hey, does that remind you at all of better to be a servant in the house of God?
It did actually. Yeah. Yeah, I know what you're referring to.
There's like a real parallel there.
Oh, 100%.
Intentional or not. Well, it's a very similar idea. It's similar.
For sure.
I'm probably going to upset people by saying this, but I don't know. It's similar kind of thing. It's like, well, once you're aware of salvation and the service of God and the glory of God and all that sort of gear, you would rather be the lowest person in his household as servant than just about anything. And that's kind of what he says. He says
for sure,
a serf in the house of some landless man, or indeed anything else in the world, than to hold the opinions and live the life that they do, in reference to the people back in the cave that are just pointing at shadows.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, I thought it was really fascinating.
Yeah, it's got a similar feel. It's about integrity too. So I like how, like, straight after that it goes, and to endure anything rather than think as they do and live after their manner. Yes, he said, I think that he would rather suffer anything than entertain false notions and live in this miserable manner. I think it's really funny.
Well, it's not hard because aside from knowing nothing, being bound and chained in the cave's probably not
It wouldn't be comfortable, would it?
No, you wouldn't think so.
Well, an analogy I thought of that was relevant was I used to play PlayStation and now I play Xbox. I would not go back to PlayStation. Yes,
it was but a shadow on a wall, an illusion.
It's got nothing on the old Xbox.
Too funny.
So in my book I wrote there, when you acquire true knowledge, you become blind to the false. I was like, ooh, I wrote this down.
Interesting.
It's nice. So this is where they talk about that corruption. I think, Lachlan, they start talking about that with if there were a contest and he had to compete in measuring the shadows with the prisoners who had never moved out of the den, whilst his sight was still weak and before his eyes had become steady, and the time which would be needed to acquire this new habit of sight may be very considerable, would he not be ridiculous? Men would say of him that basically, he went up and down, he came without his eyes, and that it was better not even to think of ascending, and if anyone tried to lose another and lead him up to the light, let them only catch the offender and they'll put him to death.
So this is him having gone, this is the person who's gone outside the cave and contemplated the true goodness, going back into the cave. So basically what you're saying is he wouldn't be able to understand the shadows anymore. He wouldn't care about them, wouldn't understand them, and the others would be looking at him going, are you blind, you idiot?
Yeah. And I think it's like the difficulty they have is like, why would we listen to you? You clearly have no idea what you're talking about because you can't even tell me what that is on the wall, right?
That's the navigator from the ship analogy.
Yeah, you're coming back, aren't you? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, because earlier on he's talking about the ship and they were talking about why don't people listen to philosophers? And he's like, well, I mean, if you're on a ship and everyone's fighting over who wants to be boss and there's only one person that actually has any knowledge of navigation, they're not going to care what he's got to say. They're just going to laugh at him and call him an idiot.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
exactly the same, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
That's a really good one, Tim. I like that one as well.
mm,
I thought it's speaking to the challenge that they have for these philosopher kings as well. You know, in that how you're going to get the masses to listen to you, and if the knowledge you've attained can make you, and I think like this is maybe what they were referring to previously in the other chapters about the philosophers looking like strange monsters or something like that, because their realities perception of reality has changed so much that it's just everything's just so much more foreign now, and that relating to that the rest of society is just you look at odds with it, and so it's probably hard for people to see that comparison. You look like a strange monster. You're so confused, versus our ordered society. I don't
Can
know.
either of you guys think of a time where you've met someone like that? I mean, I can't. I'm just wondering. Like, can anyone think of a real world example of something to this effect, where
I don't know.
where
And you know
someone's
what?
just so clearly their knowledge is so clearly beyond anyone else's that everyone else in the room thinks they're crazy?
Yeah, but would you recognize it? Because you'd probably just
I
dismiss it
guess you
and wouldn't
wouldn't.
give it any more thought because you'd think that they're nuts, right?
Yeah.
yeah, I'm thinking about it. I don't want to be fast to answer that because it's a good question.
It's a
I've
great
certainly
question.
been in the room with very intelligent people who, at times, I can't follow their argument quickly enough. And in hindsight, once I've thought about what they were saying, I've realised later, oh, okay, that's what they're on about. But
Wait, hold on. But when that's happened, I'm assuming that that person was already in a position of authority.
yeah, mostly.
So you'd have to invert it. So imagine that that person came into the room and gave that argument, and they had like 7 other people in the room who were peers or even maybe in positions of authority over that person, and they had that same reaction to you. Now, because that person's in authority, you've kind of just gone along with it, and then you've gone and thought about it and come back and, oh yeah, he was right. But if he wasn't in a position of authority, if he was the minority in that room, surrounded by other people who were trying to control that room, what kind of reaction do you think
Oh,
potentially could
I
have happened
see
to that?
that happen. I've seen that happen in the workplace before.
Oh, okay, interesting.
Yeah, yeah.
This could even be like, because if you think about Socrates, and he's kind of like this, he's almost a bum. Like he sort of like turns up to these symposiums, at least he's got shoes on this time or whatever else is, you know what I mean? And, sprouting all this sort of stuff. It's like, imagine if you heard some of this kind of thing coming from like some like homeless dude down on Pitt Street or something. Like,
Yeah,
is
and
anyone
you're like,
gonna listen?
you would say to him, mate, why would I listen to you? You don't even have a house. You don't even have shoes. And his response would be like, well, what good are shoes when the light of the day has shone upon me, and now I have true knowledge, and I'm trying to share that with you. Why are you talking about my shoes? You'd be like, okay, crazy dude, whatever. I
I've
need some cash
ascended
from my
beyond
boss.
footwear.
Yeah. No, you're exactly right. It's the position that Socrates is in. I wonder if that's why he takes the tact he does, because he doesn't. He does does things. Oh, I don't want to tell you. Oh,
Yep.
all right, okay. If you're not going to like it, but if you really want me to tell you, I'll tell you. I mean, like he makes them drag it out of him so that they can't get upset with
Yeah.
him when he says
You're all
something
going to laugh,
outlandish.
but let me, if you want to know, I'll tell you.
I think
Yeah,
you're right.
and that's why I think he sort of drip feeds stuff too, right? Because he like needs to get you on board with something that's sort of fringe, and then once you're on board with that, we draw you a little bit closer, and then pow, I can hit you with the real idea.
Yeah, very much so.
Mm.
So that brings us up to a bit of a punchline moment, which I don't usually bring my Christian faith into this podcast, but I love this part and I underlined the crap out of it. So bear with me as I read it. So this entire allegory, I said, you may now append Glaucon to the previous argument. The prison house is the world of sight. The light of fire is the sun, and you will not misapprehend me if you interpret the journey upwards to be the ascent of the soul into the intellectual world, according to my poor belief which, at your desire, I've expressed, whether rightly or wrongly, God knows. But whether true or false, my opinion is that in the world of knowledge, the idea of good appears last of all, and is seen only with an effort, and when seen is also inferred to be the universal author of all things beautiful and right, parent of light and of the Lord of light in this visible world, and the immediate source of reason and truth in the intellectual, and that this is the power upon which he who would act rationally, either in public or private life, must have his eye fixed. I read that and I was just like, God damn. That's a mad... I'm going to save that for some apologist stuff later in life. That's mad.
Is that not like a description of the Logos?
Yeah, but it's also a direct answer to people who say, how can a rational person believe in God? Follow that train of thought for a minute.
Okay. Yeah, I see. I see where you're coming from now.
Yeah.
Interesting. No, that didn't jump out at me at all. But I think you're right.
Mm. So yeah, I love that part. I've underlined it, circled it, wow next to it. I think it's my favourite part so far in the whole book.
There you go.
Interesting.
A winner.
So you reckon he's got there by sound reason?
I think... what's the right way of saying this? I can't recall the word. What's the word? Gosh. Oh, there I've got the word. It came into my brain. Sorry, I'm 2 rooms in.
I was going to say I don't know what's happening in that cave.
I think it demonstrates it's very difficult to be logical and not to get to the conclusion of, at the very least, agnostic.
Right.
That's my view on that part. So we can have conversations about which belief is the right belief, but I think the conclusion that logic draws you to an atheist solution is, in that description at least, difficult to justify. That's my thoughts.
I'll have to give that some more thought. I hadn't really thought about it from that perspective. But you might be right.
Yeah, have a chew on it and let me know what you think next week.
Any thoughts on that, Lachlan?
Yeah, look, I can see the parallel there too. I guess they're coming from a position of faith as well, so that would make sense in that. I suppose that sort of journey and that ascension towards the light as well. I'll chew on that one a bit more myself, but
just on that though, Timmy, particularly from an apologetic standpoint, and even Socrates would characterize it this time, because he actually says it just then. He's like, if this is true, then this is the conclusion. But if this is a correct description of reality, then it would stand to reason that the people down there in the cave who are only looking at the sun and the shadows are essentially the materialists. And they can't comment on ultimate reality or what's really true or what's most important, because they haven't accessed that at all, because they're only inside the cave. So it's almost like a critique of materialist epistemology.
I think you're right, and he gets onto that as well, because he talks about how can you hold somebody who's gone and witnessed this and has seen the truth and ascended, then be held accountable by man in society who have no idea what the truth is, and they're just using their projection of justice or truth to measure you or anybody else by. So how can you kind of expect them to live back in the cave and be judged by those people who have no idea?
Well, to some extent, I suppose within that analogy, they're not even talking about justice and truth. They're just talking about the shadows on the wall and who's the best at predicting the next one.
Yeah,
that's really interesting.
Mm.
Actually, funnily enough, this is a bit of a tangent, but It used to be, I don't know whether it was British common law or whether it was legislated, and I don't know how long ago it was. I'm guessing in maybe 100, 150 years ago in British common law. If you're an atheist, you were not allowed to give evidence at court. You were considered on par with basically people that were mentally handicapped in terms of the likelihood of you telling the truth. I don't know whether they were thinking of Plato at the time, but what I was just saying about if he's right, then the people within this is. I'm sorry, anyone that's an atheist who's listening. I'm not having a go. I'm talking pure hypotheticals. I'm wondering if back then, when the common law was essentially that you can't even give evidence if you're an atheist. I wonder if it was almost like tied into this cave idea, where, well, why would we trust anything you say? Because you don't even understand what truth and justice is, because all you can talk about is the shadows on the wall, like physical reality.
Maybe. I don't know. I haven't looked at that.
That's probably a stretch.
But
I
thought
it occurred to me just then.
Yeah, I feel like it's just got a similar flavour to like the born again rhetoric of just, I've now received this new spirit of truth. I'm born again, and so now I'm changed, and I'm not that thing anymore. It's just similar flavour, and I thought it was a good underline moment for me just to put that in my utility belt of conversation pieces to have with people who have a different point of view than me, which is good.
Let me know if you use it.
I'll let you know.
I actually thought this was also just an interesting, like, it's almost like he's having a dig at everyone else who's in the room, in the sense that you guys aren't in a position to judge me, really. Like, I'm being polite, but if you can understand what I'm saying, you guys are basically all ignorant, and
Yep.
like, this is what I think. This is how I feel. Don't really care if you take it on or not, but I think it's kind of like this is how it is for me. And if you haven't seen the light in some senses, then
what am I going to do? All I can do is sit here and answer your questions.
I wonder if you're exactly right. Finger puppets at the same time.
Well, you think of Thrasy. You think back to Thrasymachus at the start. Like it all sort of makes perfect sense now. I mean, you're right what he's saying, but there's also a sense of humility, because he does keep coming back to saying, "Look,
He does.
I don't know the full story." I guess if he put himself in the scenario, he would say, "I've been outside the cave, and I've observed the night sky, but I haven't stared into the sun directly yet," kind of thing. I
think you're right, because he's modest enough to sort of say that he hasn't finished the journey.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, let's keep going. So,
but he recognizes ignorance.
Yeah. Okay. So he goes. After that, you must not wonder that those who attain this beatific vision are unwilling to descend to human affairs, for their souls are ever hastening. Beatific, sorry. For their souls are ever hastening into the upper world, where they desire to dwell, which desire of theirs is very natural, if our allegory may be trusted. Yes, very natural. So I won't read this whole thing, but is this, just correct me if I'm wrong, is this roughly where he starts talking about someone has to go back down, and that's the purpose of the Guardians? Is it at this point they do that, or is it a bit later?
A little bit later he gets on to that, but this is setting it up for that for sure, because he sort of starts to talk about that they've got work to do, and more or less that they have to take it down, because that's the whole purpose, is to be able to kind of lead, knowing now what the truth is, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, so I think that's right. They basically say after a time of them coming back down, their eyes will adjust enough that they can play those games and engage at that level, but that they have the insight from being outside of the cave, so to speak. So then they're better equipped at being able to lead at that cave level kingdom.
Yeah.
Well, I think you also pointed out, though, that it's, I think if you're not getting the right education or something, that's a time when you could be easily influenced by evil forces as well, because you have some understanding and you can use it for evil purpose as well as potentially good purpose. Because he talks about,
That's true.
I can't remember exactly what the word was, rogues or something like that. And they talked about that in the previous book as well, how, perhaps philosophers or what have you can be sort of misguided and taken off, and they can do even more damage than just a regular person can because they've seen something and it's being turned to something nefarious.
Is that referring to the sophists, do you think?
Yeah.
You'd have to think so, like with some of the dialogue that's been going on in the previous books, but and so like that's where he starts to bring it back around full circle to that whole sort of education piece again. Saying that you do need to bring these people, I suppose, into make sure they stay on the right pathway or something. I suppose.
Yeah. Just for the sake of time, I think we understand that idea. We'll keep going. So that the desire is to stay. The true philosopher's desire is to stay in the upper world. But they say this must not be allowed. They must be made to descend again among the prisoners in the den and partake of their labours and honours, whether they are worth having or not. And Glaucon objects. He goes, but this is unjust. Ought we to give them a worse life when they might have better? And he's like, you've forgotten the purpose of our republic. The intention of the legislator, who did not aim at making any one class in the state happy above the rest. So he's saying, usually this would be the path of the philosopher, but in our example, no, they've got to go back. They've got to go back and play, but he uses this to justify that they'll be good leaders, and I underlined this part too.
This bit's good.
Yeah, the truth is that the state in which the rulers are most reluctant to govern is always the best and most quietly governed, and the state in which they are most eager, the worst. And I was like, yes, that is good.
Yeah, it's that whole thing
it's a
again
hell of a
about
quote, that one.
are you hungering for power or are you hungering for truth or knowledge?
Yeah, and
It's pretty good.
I think that's something that is told over and over again in all the sort of different hero stories. Whether it is Tolkien or anyone else, the best kings or leaders were the ones that didn't really want the power. The ones that do want it ended up getting corrupted. So
That's I guess you're right. That's the ring, innit?
Well, Aragorn's good leader because he didn't want to be king, but he had to be. George R. R. Martin.
And he said no to the ring right at the start.
That's right. George R. R. Martin doesn't know how to finish a story, but he does understand that the reason Jon Snow is a good leader is because he never wants to be in charge. He at least had that part right.
True.
There's heaps of other examples. So I think that's a really good point. So what do you think about that? Do you think that the reluctant philosopher would be the right sort of person to lead the Republic?
I think in the way that they've structured the Republic, it makes sense in the way that they've done it. The whole thing, I think, is that they're trying to sort of stamp out, jealousy and the grab for material things as well, and the structure of the Guardians, not having wealth or gold or silver or whatever it is, and that the divinity is within them as good people. I think is kind of what he's sort of setting it up for. So it makes sense in that world that they're building, I think.
Yep. I also like that they talk about the wealth. Will they rule who are truly rich, not in silver and gold, but in virtue and wisdom, which are the true blessings of life. So that's rare. Socrates drops a little opinion bomb there of he thinks the true blessings of life are virtue and wisdom. I thought that's very unusual for him to just come out with a statement like that, but he did. He's just gone bang.
Yeah. Look, in fairness, I suppose it's probably not a long reach, given what we know of Socrates. In the way that he lives his life. So I think he practices what he preaches there, right?
That's a good point.
We can probably forgive him that one. Yeah, but good on him.
Yeah. But I mean, if we were going to choose someone to, I don't know, whatever, run this country, let's face it, you're going to prefer, if you had the choice, somebody who's like really loves wisdom and justice and the virtues over money and power. Like I'm not convinced it's even a possibility. I'm just saying, like, in a perfect world, would that not be the person you want to rule?
I don't know. You'd have to wonder though if you had Socrates in the chair, and it's like Socrates, these guys are on our borders. We've got to go to war. What is war?
Let's
define what.
That's a really good point.
We need to do something.
It'd be like, I told you, all you need is bread and water. You wanted wine and cheese, and now we have war.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. You brought this on yourself.
Just coming back to the wealth thing for a minute. Do you think that was I'm going to be controversial here, but Mr. Trump, right? President Donald Trump, former President Donald Trump. I used to hear that a lot from people that were pro-Trump of he's going to be a better politician because he's not in it for the money, because he's already like super rich, which is a corruption of what this is saying. Like if you had a guy that wasn't in it for the money who wasn't rich, that would be more aligned with this criteria. But do you think that was a thing that people were sort of maybe contributing to him, of like, oh well, he doesn't need the money, so he must be doing it for other reasons?
Fame.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Just because he's not doing it for the money, because he's already got money, doesn't mean he's not doing it for some other reason, as in power.
Yeah, but it certainly set him apart.
Or fame or honor.
Yeah, but it certainly set him apart from his competitors, that he wasn't in it for the cash. Like the fame, 100%. But I don't know. Do you think that might have made some people go, I'll vote for that guy, because he's clearly not in it for the money?
Probably.
Yeah.
Probably swung some people.
And look, I mean, I remember the story that he was donating his paycheck, different sort of faculties or whatever it was going to be, like through the course of his term and stuff like that. I guess like he tried to practice what he was preaching early on there, that, I'm not here for the money.
Yeah, he did do that. Yeah. I think it's not that uncommon for the presidents to donate at least a percentage of their income. But anyway, that just occurred to me. I thought that's that one thing in and of itself isn't enough to say philosopher leader, but it certainly was a distinction that is rare. Like I don't recall that happening elsewhere recently, at least.
Are you going to vote for Clive Palmer now?
Oh,
well, he's not running.
Well, yeah, that's true.
He's funding a party. He's involved in a party, but he's not actually running himself. I don't know whether that's better or worse.
Well, is it better because then he's not after the fame or the money?
Oh, yeah, I don't know. I mean,
he's probably after money somehow.
Like Spaceballs 2, the search for more money.
Is he potentially pushing a political party because he knows they'll legislate in a way that will protect his money? I mean, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know.
Official contracts.
I just thought of a tweet I'm going to send to Elon Musk. It's going to be stuff fixing world hunger. Please make Spaceballs 2. I'm sure you'll get that going. All right, let's keep going. So
that's the cave, roughly, isn't it? I mean, that's more or less the cave.
Yeah. Well, pretty much, because we're talking about the philosopher, ruling, but then they get distracted and they go into this discussion around war and education.
Oh, I don't know whether that's distracted. I think they're actually getting back on track, aren't they, at that point? Because they were originally talking about how do we educate these people to be leaders. So I think they're actually, I know it's really a long way around, but I think they're actually getting back on track there, is the way I read it.
Yeah, okay.
I must admit, I thought the same as Tim when I read it the first time, that it did sound like he just kind of got distracted. But
Yeah.
I think, it's purposeful in what he's doing for sure. But it does feel like a distraction though.
Well, it felt like
Yeah, I don't know, I
a
agree.
Sheldon moment here. It's like, well, the answer to education and understanding all things is math.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, it's used in everything. Why not? Why not?
Yeah.
And it might also be useful in war.
But I love how originally they say, like, learning math is boring and therefore not rewarding, because it's like, if you have 3 fingers, and it uses these 3, right? So your pinky finger, ring finger, middle finger. And he's like, the brain realizes they're all fingers.
And that's it, yeah.
So that's boring. But he's like, but it's not boring, because then, and he gets all philosophical about fingers. It's really bizarre.
Yeah.
Look, this bit was also, I'm not sure whether I really got my head around it, but the way I kind of understand it is he starts off by saying philosophers in our state will start out as soldiers. They're going to have to know math to be a soldier, but we should teach everyone math because math points towards higher knowledge. So, like, if you look at his levels of knowledge again, mathematics was like the second highest. And I think what he's saying is basically mathematics necessarily forces you to think about abstract concepts beyond the physical. So you can have 3 fingers, but if you start thinking about the number 3 and subtraction and addition and what that actually means, you have to start thinking about concrete ideas that are sort of beyond just the physical objects themselves. So I think triangles is the best example. It's kind of like, well, you can have a triangle, you can know how to build a triangle, but when you actually sit down and start doing mathematics of a triangle, then you are automatically in this realm of thinking about things that are higher level in his mind, those higher level things. So to me, that's the easiest way to summarize it. There's probably a lot more in there than that. I don't know. What do you think, Lachlan?
No, look, I think you're on the same pathway. I mean, it just looked like they were trying to sort of grab onto something that would have more application than just philosophy, and this was something that seems to be pretty universal. But you're right; it does give you sort of like a way of thinking that's, not just straightforward. I suppose it's putting you into some detail and calculation is kind of the way that they want you to think about it.
There's something. Yeah, sorry, you go to.
Oh, sorry, I was going to say, I must admit, when I read this, it made me think, oh man, I've got to make sure my kids learn math. And but it's actually funny reading this book over the last 4 months. It's made me realize why I think things are important for my kids. So, like, it's important for my kids to do a sport. It's important for my kids to learn a musical instrument, and obviously to do their schoolwork. And reading this, I'm like, oh, actually, if I don't get my children to do a sport or some sort of physical activity that teaches them how to use their body and strengthens that body, then it's actually a failure of their education. And if I don't teach them or give them access to learn an instrument, then it's, again, I'm failing to provide them the right education. And it occurred to me that our school system has those things built into it, but even when I was in school, those things outside of math were kind of optional, and not really pushed, and particularly physical isn't really pushed now. And I'm thinking about that at the moment. I'm thinking that through, and like today, my son was like, "I don't want to play clarinet next year." I went, "That's fine, but you have to play an instrument." And he's like, "I don't want to play an instrument." Like, all right, well then I don't want to pay for your Xbox subscription. And he got a little bit upset at me. He's like, why? And I'm like, well, I'm sorry, but learning an instrument for me, it's mandatory for your education. It's part of your schooling, and you got to do it. So if you're not going to do something that I think is mandatory, then I'm not going to pay for your Xbox subscription. That's not mandatory. So, I'm like, but you can choose your instrument. So then his mum talked to him a little bit later because she's a bit softer than I am, and he's decided to go for either guitar or drums next year. So I'm going to try and guide him towards guitar. But I was wondering,
something you can actually teach him.
Yeah, but has reading this book made you guys think about your kids' education at all, and that sort of stuff, or am I alone in that?
I haven't really been thinking too much about the kids, but I have been thinking a lot more about myself and just what I do. And yeah, I suppose you got to start with the self and then move on from there. It sounds like you're already doing you're doing a good job with the Socratic education there anyway, Tim. So that's
Well, I'm learning philosophy. I play an instrument. I've just signed up to a 12-week challenge which starts tomorrow, which I did the shop for today. I have to eat 2 kilos of tomato this week. I don't think I eat 2 kilos of tomato in a month. That's like one of the dietary requirements. So I'm trying to get these things that are in the book like good, and see what that's like. So yeah, I've definitely thought about myself and applied, and now I'm like, okay, the kids, where are they at with this stuff?
Yeah, I must admit, I think there's been enough every week, and it's been really good. But there's enough for me to digest before I maybe by the end of this book, I'll have a think about what I want to impart after that.
Well, I'm looking forward to asking it, because at the end of reading this book, I'd like us to do an episode where we just talk about what we learned and what impacts it's had. That's definitely a sneak peek for me, that it's impacted that part for sure. How about you, Ribs?
I have not as practically as you. I think typically I've just been a lot more abstract with it, but the way I have seen Socrates use his method, and particularly his idea of looking at particulars and then looking at the higher knowledge of particulars, I'm a big fan of that, and I have actually been trying to think of ways to teach that to my kids. And I've sort of started to do that in an informal way. But then I said this to someone at work the other day, I realized, and I think it's partially due to reading this book, one of the things that I worry about is when I'm gone, will I have taught my kids, or will they have at least learnt how to make good decisions in terms of what's right and wrong? And I think that's partially come from this book, because you can see Socrates keep going back to, but what is it? Because if you can't figure out what it is, if you can't figure out what is truth and what is justice, then what are you even doing? So, like I said, nowhere near as practically as what you're talking about, Tim, but certainly in an abstract sense, been really thinking about it. And I've actually decided that I want to write a dumbed down curriculum to give to my children, but I'm not going to start with this book. I'm actually going to start with some old C.S. Lewis lectures that I've read over the years.
Nice.
And I think that whole thing has sort of come out of largely from thinking about the importance of education. So, yeah.
It's funny you say that, because I was thinking about how do I turn this into a book for a 12-year-old to listen to or watch on the YouTubes, or, you know what I mean? Like, this is taking us a long time to work through this book. How do we give them the Coke syrup version, of just the big hit of insulin?
I don't know. There's so many like bits and pieces to sort of drag out of it, and I guess like the book's done it in such a conversational way, which is kind of amazing for something 2,500 years old. That it's really accessible even for our modern lives.
Big time.
Yeah, I don't know how you'd break it down though. Because I must admit, like when I make my notes sometimes from reading, I keep it. It's quite sterile, and when you look at it just on that sterile sort of fashion, it loses something from the content and the way it's been delivered.
It loses the characters and the relational content, and
yeah.
I think you're right. Maybe what we need to do is some clips with dogs and call it like Dogrities, and,
Awesome dogs.
some puppy dogs having the dialogue. Have one called Glaucon, and have like a aggressive, yappy Chihuahua as Thrasymachus.
Yeah. I thought for
No, but I
sure he's
think
a
you're,
Rottweiler. Come on.
but I think you're right, Tim. And when you were talking about those different things like physical education and musical education, you're right. They are still within our school system, but I suspect that they've now become so divorced from what they originally were. Because I can only assume that when those things made their way into the educational system, it was probably off the back of this kind of thinking. But now we've moved so far down the track, they've become, yeah, sort of really divorced from their roots, and they are almost very insular. You could almost say that what they've become now are particulars. So that's the way that Socrates would say that now those individual subjects are just particulars, but they're divorced from their form, from their true meaning.
Yeah.
It's funny, like I think, the curriculum sort of side of things has changed quite a lot. The high school I went to, right, it became a selective high school. And I was the last year of non-selective kids who went through my high school. And it was, when I was going through, it was quite a sporting school and all that sort of thing. Obviously, everyone's doing all their learning and stuff, but their sports teams were fairly strong and all that sort of thing. And then that school kind of flipped around when it became a selective school and just really purely focused on academic pursuits. And there's no focus on sports at all. And it's funny that that's almost, I think, completely dropped out of their curriculum there now, because I think it's a perception a little bit about, almost what we're talking about in this book about the athletes being like knuckle draggers or something like that. And then the, I suppose, educated elite being a bit airy-fairy. But it's like, well, that's what we want, just the educated elite and no sports. And you actually probably need results.
I think that's a result of NAPLAN. Because the schools are judged on their academic score only. They are not judged on the fitness of the students.
Why would you waste time on it? Yeah,
or their musical. They're only judged on their academic results. And I know, selecting my son's school, I took a bit of a different approach to a lot of people I spoke to, because I looked at things like the size of the property, how many ovals and sports facilities they had. Did they do music well? And they've got like this music auditorium, and they had a classroom with 30 pianos in it, like 30 electric keyboards in there.
Yeah.
How big was the library? They were the things I looked at. I looked at NAPLAN last. And it wasn't the major deciding factor for me on this is the result of the school. But I know, I have family who are teachers, and I know NAPLAN's a big deal. And some funding is based on their academic results, and I think that's why. I think the system is partially responsible for that, because it's measured purely on academic result. It's not measured on the creativity. It's not measured on their ability to teach music, and it's certainly not measured on their ability to produce people who are fit and healthy, who aren't overweight. That would never get raised, because it would be seen as being mean or unkind in some way to say that people are fat or unhealthy.
What I think it loses to? I think team sport, in particular, well, maybe not even in particular, but you lose. I think sport at a young age teaches virtue, and I think you lose that if you don't teach it, if you don't have it in schools. Like, it teaches cooperation, teamwork, but it also teaches virtue. I mean, it's the closest thing that we can have in our society to heroic behavior without, actual bloodshed. I think sports actually provides that opportunity for people, for kids. And now that I think about it, that's probably something that is what do you call it? Just not really thought about. And I think it's a loss.
Team sports helped my children massively, particularly my son. And when he first started, he found it really difficult. And the it taught him to be less selfish, right? Because if something went wrong, he would get frustrated and want to stop playing. And it was like, no, you can't stop playing, because if you stop playing, you're letting down your teammates, and then they'll get frustrated. But if you make a mistake, you just got to own that mistake and go, my bad, move forward, and keep going, and be an encourager on that team, and like help other people to keep going too. And it was really wonderful to see. Probably took about 2 to 3 months, but he went from being very immature and unable to deal with criticism and unable to deal with failure to accepting that failure was a necessary part of winning, that criticism was necessary to improve, and that it wasn't all about him. And it only took 2 or 3 months, and he learnt some amazing life lessons through playing team sports. I'm so grateful.
Yeah, you learn to win. You learn to win. You learn to lose, and you learn all sorts. And you have the opportunity for good sportsmanship too. And look, sports can be taught badly as well as it can be taught well, obviously. But like think of Cobra Kai. Anyway, no, I think that's interesting.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a good place to pause for tonight. What do you guys think?
I think we have to stop. I don't know what your watch is looking like, but
yeah, we're getting pretty close to our maximum time. I was going to do a pub for lots of us, which I'll put the thing up here. And we have a wonderful jingle playing over the top of this in this production. So the pub philosophers, all I want to say quickly is the Eternals movie, worst Marvel movie I've seen in a long time. You haven't seen it yet, Lachlan, so we won't go into spoilers.
You can feel free, because it doesn't sound like I need to see that one.
It was trash. I hated it. I was so bored. It
was really boring. Character development was very limited. There was 8 characters. 2 of them I didn't even remember the names of. And it was meant to be, obviously all stories have good moments and tragic moments. The tragic moments I did not care about because I did not understand who that person was.
Without going into spoilers, one of the main characters dies in a really tragic way, and I laughed. I laughed out loud because it was so. I think I had a lower opinion than what Tim did. I couldn't stand it. I was like, this is hilarious.
Yeah, I think it highlighted that whoever wrote that movie did not understand mythology at all. And they don't understand the broader universe of the Marvel Cinematic Universe either. So, yeah, I used to think that the second Thor movie was probably the worst Marvel movie. That's substantially better than this one.
Yeah, fair call.
That's about as strong a do not watch warning as you could possibly give, I reckon.
Yeah.
Mate, I wouldn't waste your time with it.
Yeah, it's pretty ordinary. So, all right. Have you got anything to add to the pub there, Lachlan?
No, only that all of us are playing the new Forza Horizon and enjoying Mexico.
Yes.
Maybe we can have a bit more of a chat about that next week. But
we're going to start a club. We're going to start a club on it. So anyone that's listening that plays, we'll bring out the name for that next week and see if anyone's interested in joining us.
Yeah, that'd be good.
Sure.
I'm loving it. I love that they've made the steering wheel usable. I found in the last couple of Forza games, I've got a steering wheel for my Xbox. I've never been able to use it in the other games and have anything resembling competency. I'm always about 10 seconds a lap slower with the steering wheel than I am with the controllers. But in this Forza, I reckon it's less than a second a lap. I'm off. And that's with very, very minimal practice. So I think with a little bit of effort, I could probably get some better lap times with the steering wheel than with the controller, which I think that's how it should actually be. It should be better to use a steering wheel than a thumbstick. But even if I can get it to just being where it is right now, where it's just that 1% not quite as good, that's good enough for me. Because just sitting there throwing the wheel around and using the feet pedals, it's mad fun.
Right on.
Yeah.
Feels like Daytona.
I'm keen to give that a go.
Yeah, when you come over, man, Give you a crack.
That's it.
All right, well,
that might be the next pub philosophers in person having a round of Forza.
We'll have to stream it. All right, well, for those of you listening, thanks for joining us. And, like this show, the Republic wasn't built in a day, and neither middle-aged men. And we'll see you next time. Have a good one.
All right, boys. See ya.
Yeah.